Main focus of the task is as follows. First, the manifold gauge must be adjusted to 0 before using it. Second, in the case of mixed refrigerants, the amount of the refrigerant to be charged must be liquefied and charged into the liquid line on the high pressure side. Third, additional refrigerants must be charged in a liquid state into the low pressure side while the compressor is running. Fourth, when supplementing the refrigerant, it should be charged in a small amount, giving some time intervals so that liquid compression does not occur. Fifth, the refrigerant loss should be very small when connecting and disconnecting the manifold gauge hose and the pipe and when purging the non-condensable gas. Sixth, after removing the manifold gauge, the leakage test should be conducted to the connecting parts using a gas detector. Seventh, after completing the refrigerant charging, the leakage test should be conducted to the refrigerant cylinder. Then, the refrigerant cylinder should be capped. Eighth, be sure to check if the required amount of refrigerant is charged through the sight glass. Ninth, be sure to understand the characteristics of the tools that are used for conducting the electrical continuity and insulation test. 10th, you should be able to understand and conduct the procedure for the insulation test among L, N, and wires. 11th, you should be able to understand and conduct the procedure for the continuity test between L and N wires. 12th, you should be able to understand and conduct the procedure for the earth continuity test. 13th, you should be able to understand and conduct the procedure for the insulation test between electrical wires at the load side of main switch. 14th, you should be able to understand and conduct the procedure for the earth insulation test at the load side of main switch. Please check the preparations and tools for this training. These are precautions. When charging refrigerant, non-condensable gas should not be mixed in. When dealing with the high-pressure refrigerant, be careful of the safety accidents such as an explosion. Make sure not to get burned from the low temperature of the refrigerant. Make sure to wear a safety gear such as safety goggles, long-sleeved clothes, and leather gloves. When dealing with electricity, be careful of the electric shock. Make sure to be familiar with the equipment manual and use the equipment following its manual. When working with live electricity, make sure to wear electrical insulated gloves. Make sure to follow the procedure for the electrical continuity and insulation test. Make sure to conduct the electrical continuity and insulation test accurately according to the circuit diagram. Otherwise, you might fail to operate the refrigeration system at the beginning. The electrical short and insulation test for the equipment should be conducted when the refrigerant is charged because some faults might not be detected properly when conducting the test in the evacuated site. Please check what you are going to perform on this task. This is charging refrigerant. Make sure to wear a suitable safety gear according to the working condition. Make sure to wear safety goggles and gloves to prevent burns in case of contacting to their eyes or skin. Open all valves of the modules that have been evacuated. Make sure to charge the refrigeration system with the refrigerant after completing the evacuation process. It is important to charge the refrigeration system with the optimal amount of refrigerant that the system requires. Before charging the refrigerant, check whether the refrigerant scale is zeroed and place the refrigerant cylinder onto the scale to measure its weight. The refrigerant scale is used for measuring the amount of refrigerant injected into the refrigeration system. After recording its weight, check whether the manifold gauge is adjusted to 0. And connect the manifold gauge to the refrigerant cylinder and the refrigeration system. Connect the yellow-colored service hose of the manifold gauge to the refrigerant cylinder. Connect the blue-colored low-pressure hose of the manifold gauge to the high-pressure part of the refrigeration system. Connect the red-colored high-pressure hose to the low-pressure part of the refrigeration system. Before charging the refrigerant, make sure to purge some non-condensable gas in the hose. Turn the refrigerant cylinder upside down and then slightly open the valve on the refrigerant hose to purge it. Conduct the purge work with the minimum amount of refrigerant at this time. Reason for turning the refrigerant cylinder upside down is to charge the refrigeration system with the refrigerant as liquid type. The mixed refrigerant, such as pure HFC or R400, has the different mixing ratio depending on its type, liquid type or gas type. Therefore, make sure to turn the cylinder upside down to charge the refrigeration system with the accurate amount of refrigerant as liquid type. The refrigerant used by the worker now is a mixed refrigerant R404A. Refrigerant cylinders are color-coded by type. This is to prevent mixing and misuse by distinguishing refrigerants during the process of handling refrigerants. After finishing the purge, inspect whether there is any leakage on the connections of the manifold gauge and hoses from the refrigerant cylinder to the refrigeration system with a gas detector. With a gas detector, you can conveniently detect even the small amount of leakage. If the gas detector is touched on a leaking part, it shows up the light or rings an alarm. From right after the expansion valve to the suction part of the compressor, insulate pipes and components using heat insulation. For the heat insulating materials, you may use the rubber foam insulation or the Artelon insulation suggested in the materials list. In case of using the rubber foam insulation, glue the split part with the adhesive glue. In case of using the Artelon insulation, finish it using the tape. When wrapping the heat-insulating materials with the tape, make sure not to apply too strong force because it can cause a deformation of the heat-insulating materials. Separate the insulated gas line with the liquid line without wrapping them together. Check the charged amount of refrigerant through the sight glass installed on the refrigeration system. If no bubble is seen on the sight glass, if the bubble is formed inside the sight glass but does not move, or if the bubble is formed at the entrance of the sight glass but seen at rare intervals, this indicates the refrigerant is sufficiently charged. If the flow of the refrigerant is observed, or if the bubble moves constantly, this indicates the refrigerant is insufficient. So, make sure to keep charging it. When dealing with the refrigerant, make sure to fully understand how to handle it and follow the suitable charging method. These are general precautions on dealing with the refrigerant. The refrigerant should be kept away from the flame or the electric heater. Generally, the temperature of the refrigerant cylinder should not exceed over 52 degrees Celsius. Do not pressurize the refrigeration system or the refrigerant cylinder which contains the refrigerant with air to inspect the refrigerant leakage. Use the cylinder that is qualified by the regulation and do not damage the valve of the safety device for releasing the pressure. Work at a well-ventilated place when dealing with the refrigerant. Check whether the designated amount of refrigerant is charged through high and low pressure gauge and close the main valve of the refrigerant cylinder. Close the service valve of the liquid receiver and purge the remaining refrigerant in the manifold gauge through the compressor's Schroeder valve. Disconnect the refrigerant cylinder and the manifold gauge from the refrigeration system and record the charged amount shown on the refrigerant scale. After the charging is completed, the refrigerant cylinder should be capped. Make sure to conduct a leakage test with a gas detector. Put the refrigerant cylinder down and organize the refrigerant scale. This is an electrical continuity and insulation test. Check the 0 point of the multimeter before the inspection. Turn on the earth leakage circuit breaker so that all control lines can be inspected through the power plug. While referring to the electrical drawing, test continuity of the L and N phase and grounding wire from the plug to the control circuit. Continuity inspection of the ice rink and heat recovery coils is also required during the grounding continuity inspection. Inspect L and N phase for short circuits on the power plug. Inspect insulation of L phase and grounding on the power plug. Inspect insulation of N phase and grounding on the power plug. If there is no particular instruction in the test project, set the menu of the multimeter to bell tester. The warning sound of bell tester will turn off when it is greater than 100 ohms during the continuity test. If the warning sound goes off, it means that the wire is disconnected. When wiring, make sure that all electric wires, including grounding wires, are firmly connected without missing a single wire according to the electric circuit. Inspection of the circuit before energization is very important, as the normal operation is required without any fuse blowing and circuit breaker tripping during the initial power-up. Circuit inspection can usually find disconnection of fuses and components, open and short circuits of coils or wires, and whether there is earth leakage. If you contact the red-colored lead-in wire pin and the black-colored lead-in wire pin at both sides of the fuse, the resistance should be 0 or point to a constant number. But if infinity symbol is shown, that means it's disconnected. If the control circuit inspection is finished, conduct the line-to-line test and the earth insulation inspection at the load circuit. Now, there are two load circuits. They are motors of the compressor and the condenser. Conduct line-to-line insulation and earth insulation tests of the two motor coils. Use a mega-ohm meter instead of a digital multimeter. It is an earth insulation inspection of a load circuit that inspects the grounding bar of the control box, L and N phases, on the MC load side. If the resistance value is over a certain standard point, it is judged to be electrically insulated. Before energizing the system, make sure to check whether the earth insulation resistance value is over 1 megaohm. It is a line-to-line insulation inspection of load circuits. It measures the values of L and N phases on the MC load side. If all tests are completed, put away the multimeter. Check again the key points of the task we've worked on in this training. In this training, we've learned the refrigerant injection into refrigerant module and the insulation test. Everybody, thank you for your hard works.